They say the most dangerous word in America isn't guilty or innocent. It's life, because when a judge says that single word, it doesn't just end a trial. It ends a boy's future. It ends a family's hope. It ends the possibility of dreams. And that's exactly what happened on the cold morning. Malik Johnson stood chained in a courtroom where no one believed in him. A courtroom that saw his skin before it saw his soul. A courtroom that had already decided his story was over before he had a chance to begin. And when the judge leaned forward, face hard, voice dripping with the weight of prejudice, and said, that one word, life, before slamming his gavel, the sound wasn't just the end of a trial. It was the explosion that would send shockwaves across America. Because Malik was no ordinary 17-year-old black teen from a struggling neighborhood. He was the son of one of the most powerful men in the country, a truth no one in that courtroom knew. Not the prosecutor, not the jurors, not even the judge, who thought he was burying another statistic. And when Malik calmly asked for his one phone call and spoke the words, "Dad, it's me. The judge gave me life. What are you going to do about it, Mr. U.S. Attorney General?" The world would never be the same again. Before we dive deep into this unbelievable journey, smash that subscribe button, because the story you're about to hear is so raw, so real, and so shocking, you won't want to miss a second of it. Malik Johnson's story didn't begin in a courtroom. It began in a neighborhood where hope was rare, where broken glass crunched under sneakers, where gunshots at night replaced lullabies, and where kids learned to run before they learned to read. But Malik was different. He had eyes that saw past the walls of his block. He had a mind that devoured books the way other kids devoured video games. And he had a secret. His father wasn't missing. His father wasn't dead. His father wasn't another man swallowed by the streets. His father was the Attorney General of the United States, the man who stood in front of cameras on national TV and spoke about justice, crime, reform, and the future of law. A man who could walk into the Oval Office and be recognized by the president himself. But to Malik, he was simply Dad. A father who had once lived in the same neighborhood, fought through the same struggles, and clawed his way into power with nothing but determination. His father told him over and over again, "Never let my name shield you, son. You fight your own battles. You prove yourself." And Malik, stubborn, proud, brilliant, agreed. He never told his friends, never told his teachers, never told the kids who teased him for not joining gangs or selling drugs, because he didn't want anyone to look at him and see privilege. He wanted them to see Malik, just Malik. But the world doesn't play fair, and secrets have a way of turning into traps. Malik's trap was set on a rainy Thursday night, when a corner store 2 blocks away was robbed by masked men. Malik wasn't there. He was at basketball practice, running drills until his legs burned, his hoodie soaked in sweat, his coach praising him for his focus. But in a city where police were hungry for quick arrests, where fitting the description meant having dark skin and a hoodie, Malik's fate was sealed the moment he walked home that night. Red and blue lights flashed, tires screeched, and in seconds, Malik was shoved against a brick wall. The roughness of the officer's hand pressing into his neck, cold cuffs locking around his wrists, voices barking accusations he couldn't even process. "You fit the description," they said. Black male, 6 feet, hoodie. That was all. That was enough. His protests were ignored, his coach's word dismissed, his mother's cries drowned out. By morning, headlines screamed, "Teen arrested in armed robbery." And just like that, the future of a boy who dreamed of college and a life beyond the block was crushed under the weight of a lie. The trial came fast. Too fast. The prosecutor smiled like a man who had already won, his words painting Malik as a monster, a gang member, a predator. The evidence: a blurry security photo that could have been anyone, a witness who changed his story 3 times, and a narrative woven out of fear and prejudice. Malik's lawyer, a public defender, drowning in 100 other cases, barely fought back, his voice quiet, his cross-examinations half-hearted. It wasn't justice, it was theater, and the audience, the jury, had bought their tickets long before the curtains opened. And then came the judge, an old man with decades of rulings that leaned heavy against boys like Malik, a man whose record showed harsher sentences for black teens and slaps on the wrist for white kids from wealthy suburbs, a man who didn't even look Malik in the eyes when he pronounced his fate. Malik's mother gripped the edge of the bench, tears streaming, whispering prayers under her breath, while the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. The judge cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and in a voice as casual as if he were ordering lunch, said one word: life. The gavel came down like a gunshot. The sound echoed, final, crushing. The crowd gasped. Some even nodded in approval. The prosecutor smirked, and Malik's mother collapsed into sobs. But Malik, he didn't flinch, he didn't break. He stood there, his wrists in chains, his face calm, his mind sharp, because he knew something no one else in that room knew. This wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning. And when the guards moved to drag him away, Malik lifted his head and said, "I want my phone call." They laughed, they sneered, they mocked him. "Who you gonna call, boy? Your dealer?" But when they shoved that old receiver into his hand, Malik dialed a number memorized since childhood, a number no one expected. And when the line clicked, his voice steady, his words clear, he said, "Dad, it's me. The judge just gave me life. What are you going to do about it, Mr. U.S. Attorney General?" And with that single call, the world shifted. When Malik's father answered the phone that night, the silence on the other end wasn't the silence of confusion. It was the silence of a storm gathering, the kind of silence that only comes when a man of immense power is about to unleash everything at his disposal. And when Malik repeated the judge's words, "Life, Dad, he gave me life," the U.S. Attorney General of the United States didn't curse, didn't shout, didn't weep. He simply stood from his chair, the leather groaning under the sudden force, and his aides froze because they had never seen his face go that cold, that hard, that dangerous. "Get the car," he said. No one argued. Within minutes, the most powerful lawman in the country was on his way to a small courthouse in a small city that had just made the biggest mistake of its existence. By dawn, convoys of black SUVs stormed down the quiet streets. Men and women in sharp suits and sunglasses poured out, and the courthouse that had mocked Malik just hours before was now swarmed with federal marshals, FBI agents, and reporters hungry for answers. The judge who had handed down the sentence sat in his chambers trembling, sweat dripping down his temple, because only now did he realize the boy he had condemned wasn't just another poor black teen from the streets. He was the son of the Attorney General, and the world's eyes were about to burn holes into every crooked word that had left his mouth. News traveled faster than wildfire. By noon, every cable network, every social media platform, every front page carried the headline, "Attorney General's son sentenced to life." Commentators erupted, politicians scrambled, activists marched, and across America living rooms buzzed with outrage and disbelief. Some called it hypocrisy, asking why it took the Attorney General's own son to expose a broken system that had ruined countless lives before. But others saw it as destiny, fate delivering the perfect storm, a chance for the ugliest truths of the justice system to finally be dragged into the light. In Malik's cell, guards who had mocked him now avoided his eyes, their arrogance crumbling into nervousness, and whispers spread through the prison that kids, daddies, the AG, he's gonna burn the whole place down. The judge tried to cover his tracks. He called the prosecutor into his office, his voice shaking, ordering him to get rid of those files, to clean up the mess. But it was too late. Federal agents were already in the evidence room, pulling boxes, scanning hard drives, unearthing documents the town had buried for years. What they found was worse than anyone expected. Missing footage suddenly reappeared, showing Malik wasn't even near the robbery. Sworn testimonies contradicted each other so badly, they crumbled under cross-examination. And most damning of all, fingerprints at the crime scene that had been ignored pointed directly to the judge's own nephew. A privileged white teen with a history of petty theft and violence, whose record had been scrubbed clean again and again. The entire case against Malik wasn't just weak, it was rotten. A conspiracy of negligence, laziness, and racism, held together by the smug confidence that no one would ever question it. But they hadn't counted on Malik making that phone call. Inside Washington, the Attorney General was a man possessed. He stood before cameras, his voice calm but cutting like a blade, saying, "My son is not just my son. He is one of thousands who have been failed by a system more interested in convictions than truth. What happened to him is not an accident. It is a reflection of a rot that we will tear out, root and branch." His words thundered across the nation, and suddenly the story wasn't just about one teenager in one city, it was about America itself. Civil rights leaders rallied, law students walked out in protest. Even celebrities amplified Malik's name, turning him into a symbol of resistance overnight. Meanwhile, in the small courthouse that had once laughed at Malik, chaos reigned. The prosecutor was dragged before federal investigators, his smugness collapsing into stutters as he tried to explain why he had suppressed evidence. The police chief locked himself in his office, shredding documents, but agents kicked down the door and pulled him out in cuffs. The judge, cornered, begged for mercy, insisting he didn't know, that he was misled. But transcripts of his past rulings surfaced, exposing decades of bias, decades of stolen lives, and his words, life echoed back at him, like a curse. And through it all, Malik sat in his cell, quiet, watching the storm unfold. His mind racing not with fear, but with clarity. He understood now that his life was no longer just his own. He wasn't just fighting for his freedom. He was fighting for every boy who had ever stood where he stood. Every kid whose voice had been silenced. Every dream crushed by a gavel. His father's power had opened the door, but it was Malik's voice that would decide what happened next. By the end of that week, the country was divided between those who wanted Malik freed immediately and those who clung to the lie of his guilt. But one thing was certain, the judge's word, life had backfired. Instead of ending Malik's story, it had ignited a revolution. And as cameras crowded outside the courthouse, as chants of justice for Malik shook the streets, one question lingered like smoke in the air. When Malik finally walked free, what would he do with the weight of the world on his shoulders? The courtroom that once sneered at Malik now stood trembling under the weight of cameras, federal agents, and reporters. The walls that had once echoed with the sound of a gavel now shook with chants from the street outside, "Free Malik, free Malik." And when the heavy steel door of his cell finally swung open, Malik didn't walk out as a broken teenager. He walked out as a symbol, his shoulders straight, his eyes unflinching, as if he had been preparing for this moment his entire life. His father was waiting for him in the corridor, the U.S. Attorney General who had spent sleepless nights tearing apart the case. His suit rumpled, his face drawn, but his arms open, and for the first time in weeks, Malik allowed himself to feel, to embrace the man who had taught him that justice mattered, even when it cost you everything. But Malik knew this wasn't over, not for him, not for anyone. The prosecutors were collapsing under federal questioning. The police officers were suspended, and the judge himself was now facing indictment. His decades of rulings under review, his name spat on by the same colleagues who once praised him. But for Malik, none of that mattered if the system itself stayed the same. The press conference came the next morning. Reporters from every network swarmed, microphones shoved forward, cameras flashing. Millions watching live across America, and even the UK where Malik's story had spread like fire. And the world expected him to rage, to demand revenge, to bask in the humiliation of those who tried to destroy him. But when Malik stepped up to the podium, his voice was steady, his words sharp but heavy with truth. "I am not here today just as the son of the Attorney General," he began. "I am here as every kid who never had a father to answer their call. As every kid who had a gavel slammed down on their life before their story was even told. I walked free today because my father had the power to bring the truth to light. But what about the thousands who are still behind bars because no one listened? What about the ones whose fathers didn't hold office, whose names never made the news? If this system could do this to me, the Attorney General's son, what do you think it has already done to them?" The crowd erupted, chants shook the air, and Malik's words were replayed across networks, turned into headlines, shared millions of times online, a call to arms that no one could ignore. The fallout was immediate. The judge was arrested on charges of corruption and obstruction of justice. The prosecutor disbarred, the police chief forced to resign, and investigations opened into dozens of old cases, each one a scar left by a broken system. Congress launched hearings, activists launched marches, and in cities across America, murals of Malik's face began to appear, spray-painted with the words, "One word can cage you. One voice can free you." Malik's life sentence had been overturned, but the story didn't end with his freedom, it began with it. And then came the twist no one expected. Universities that once overlooked him now sent offers. Organizations begged him to speak. Talk shows lined up interviews. But Malik refused to be paraded like a token. Instead, he announced something that silenced everyone. He was founding an organization, not under his father's name, not tied to politics, but by himself. By a kid from the block who knew what it felt like to have the world against him. He called it the Life Project, a movement to fight wrongful convictions, to give kids like him lawyers who cared, to expose corrupt judges and prosecutors, to use his platform to speak for the voiceless. And in the months that followed, the Life Project exploded, chapters forming in cities across America, then spreading overseas, even into the UK, where young people connected with his story of resilience against impossible odds. But Malik wasn't just a symbol, he was a fighter. He sat in on hearings, he walked into prisons, he hugged mothers whose sons were still behind bars, and each time he told them the same thing: your story matters, your voice matters. We're going to fight for you. His father watched him with pride, but also with awe, realizing that Malik had gone beyond anything he could have imagined, that his son was no longer just his son. He was a force, a leader, a reminder that sometimes change doesn't start in the halls of Washington. It starts in the cries of a teenager who refuses to be silenced. The final twist came one evening, months later, when Malik stood on a stage in front of thousands. The same boy once mocked, once condemned, now cheered like a hero, and he told them, "The judge gave me life, but he didn't realize he gave me more than that. He gave me a purpose. He gave me a reason to fight, and now, I'm not just living my life, I'm fighting for yours." The crowd roared, tears streaming down faces, fists raised in solidarity. And in that moment, it became clear Malik Johnson wasn't just a boy who survived a broken system. He was the boy who would change it. And as the cameras zoomed in, as his words spread to millions more watching at home, Malik ended with the same fire that had carried him from a cold cell to the front lines of history. This was never just my story. This is our story. And it's only the beginning. If you believe in it, if you want to see the truth told again and again, hit that subscribe button right now, because together, we're not just making noise, we're making history.